Joe, can you hear me?
I can. Yep.
Okay, well, Joanne didn't acknowledge, Rebecca didn't acknowledge, and I see Laura, but it's way back there. How are you, Laura?
Doing good.
Okay, say hi to everybody else in the room. We'll bring the meeting to order at couple minutes after 4 minutes after 2. We have no adjustments to the agenda. After reviewing all the proposals last time, I think we're in agreement that CCI is the way to go. Everybody in agreement with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Laura, everybody in the room in agreement? Could you just let me know? I can't see them, so.
Yes, everyone's in agreement in this room.
Okay, Joanne, are you good with that? Thank you. Rebecca? Yep, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the interlocal agreement. First of all, I want to thank Linda for sending all that information. Very, very helpful, very informative. Appreciate your hard work on that. And thank you. Joe has, will give you a brief description, but roughly what we've come up with in the town of Rangeley, before we can move forward with an interlocal agreement, we have to draft our warrant to ask permission to create that and be a participant in it. And then we can get a verification from our town. I'm assuming that all the plantations are the same way. And it's only an assumption on my part. You can all chime in after Joe does his dissertation. But the bottom line is that the next step for everyone is the interlocal agreement, which makes sense. And again, thanks, Linda, for all of that information. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Steve. I just sent this by email, Steve. I know you're off-site. The other folks, I just printed it and put it in front of them. It's just an update of the draft warrant language that I put together at the end of last week. So I'll read it aloud so everybody can hear it. And this is, again, it's still in a draft format, but it's something I put together today. And I believe it would be the same for Rangeley and the other 3 plantations. You would just change the wording. So here's how it reads. To see if the voters of Rangeley will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter discussions with Sandy River Plantation, Dallas Plantation, and Rangeley Plantation for the purpose of drafting an interlocal agreement, which would allow the 4 communities to work cooperatively for the provision of broadband fiber to the premise in the region, and to then bring the agreement to a future town meeting for final approval. So that's the draft warrant article. And that would allow all 4 communities. It would tell them that their voters authorize them to enter into discussions with the other communities. And then B, it would let us know who is going to be at the negotiating table.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions?
I have some questions. It's Linda from Dallas Plantation. In looking back at this project, which has been ongoing for the past 4 or 5 years by the committee, and the funding request from the committee, inclusive of broadband, as well as the town of Rangeley asking Wright Pierce to produce a plan inclusive of broadband, and the town of Rangeley approving a TIF, the inclusive of broadband. Haven't we moved beyond the initial stage of asking for permission to bring a proposal to contract by virtue of having voted on a warrant to support the committee and the broadband project?
Joe, you want to give them give Linda the answer relative to what MMA has told us?
Yes. So I don't believe at any point that we have voted to enter an interlocal agreement with the 4 communities. So after the discussion last week that Rebecca and I had with MMA Legal, we hashed it out, and it makes sense to formally ask the voters in each of our communities if they authorize the select boards to move forward with this, to work together on a draft interlocal agreement. So that's really the question. Do the voters want to authorize their elected folks to have discussions similar to this with each other about the shape of the interlocal agreement, what that would look like? So that's the next step.
Okay, may I ask if you gave MMA the historical references of what has been done to date by the committee, by the Rangeley Board of Selectmen, and the TIF approval, as well as the plantations passing warrant articles to support the efforts that's gone into the broadband, bringing it to this point?
So Steve, I did not have any information sent to me from the plantations regarding warrant articles. And the fact that Rangeley voters recently passed a TIF district, which is pending at Department of Economic and Community Development, I don't think has any bearing on whether or not we're going to work cooperatively with the 3 surrounding communities. I think that's a separate question.
All right, well, the proposal that we received last year was presented to all 4 municipalities, and that was specifically Matrix, and in the month of February, I believe, and Consolidated. It was anticipated that that would be received within a month or so, and then the pandemic hit, and Charlie received the proposal in June that was forwarded in October to the committee. So I feel like we've already taken some steps toward, by virtue of warrant within the plantations, to support this effort, and I'm not so certain that asking for permission at this point in time is necessary.
Let me ask you,
I know, Joe, that you weren't here several years ago. You don't have the historic perspective. But
Thank
it
you.
is.
thank you. Once, Joanne, do you have verification from your board, your assessors and the voters of Sandy River to move forward with an interlocal agreement?
No,
Carrie, are you on board? Carrie Keep,
Yeah, I'm here.
do you have approval from your voters to move into an interlocal agreement?
I'm not,
No.
that's not what Linda's saying. I don't think that's what Linda's saying.
I don't know who's talking, but Carrie, do you have approval?
No, I don't have any approval of going into an agreement. We've never been asked to go into one yet.
Okay, again,
Laura, speak up.
numerous occasions.
Steve, I don't think that's what Linda's saying, and I think maybe we just need some clarification on what you all believe is this
I
article
know.
allows to do.
Joe, grab a hold of this, please.
Okay, Steve. So folks, if we can have one person speak at a time, Steve is running the meeting. So I know it's a little difficult with folks in different locations, but we can only have one person speak at a time. So Steve, go ahead.
I'm not trying to slow this process down, and I'm not trying to suggest that what anybody else is saying isn't germane, except get voter approval for an interlocal agreement. And this does not get tied to anything TIF-oriented, community economic development. And although we appreciate all that work, for me to suggest that we're going to ignore Council of MMA would be catastrophic for us all. Was Laura talking?
Yes, may I talk?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just, I think that I'm not sure that was what Linda was saying, and what we're trying to understand is, I think maybe if you clarified what you felt we could do under this warrant article, it might make us a little more understand it more. Based on how we read this warrant article, it looks like you're saying we can't do anything until we get approval in June. But my understanding is that we could work on putting together an interlocal agreement, understanding that nothing gets signed until it is presented to the public.
Very good point. And in the agenda, a little bit farther down for me, I was going to suggest that if we all agree to get our warrant articles in front of our people in June, between now and then, we could work on the interlocal agreement and have a very quick turnaround on a special town meeting after we get approval to move forward. Does that make some sense to everybody?
Do you know what the timeline would be, Steve, on that?
Well, we could all work together between now, when is our,
You broke up a little bit, Steve. I think your question was town meeting in Rangeley, it's June 8th. The board, select
June 8th.
boards. Yep, that's our town meeting.
yep, so between, go ahead.
My question was actually, when would we be able to, I mean, I don't see why we wouldn't be able to get an interlocal agreement pulled together by June. So could we schedule a meeting for July to then approve that, is what I was more asking.
I'm in agreement with that.
For a vote. So conceivably, in July, we're saying conceivably in as early as July, we can vote on the interlocal agreement.
I have a timing question and I don't want to slow it down, trust me. But Rangeley has this problem, the plantations do not. It's the ballot, right? That's the time, you gotta work backwards, correct? Because you're gonna pick a date in July, but you're gonna have the ballots ready in when? Oh, it's 30 days, 60 days prior?
30 days back. Yeah, you're exactly right, Kate. There's the timing issue of the next town meeting. And we also, we're gonna have to work on the agreement itself, which we haven't really gotten into yet. That's gonna take us some time. So, and again, I know the folks here are interested in pursuing it. The advice of council and my recommendation also is to have the voters in your communities, poll them, find out what their thoughts are, and then know for sure that they are interested in delegating or authorizing the boards in each town to pursue this. I think that is a logical next step in this so that we all know who's going to be at the table. Remember, that's been a question of mine for many months. Who's involved for sure. And that's the way to know for sure that they've authorized their elected folks to work on this agreement. Steve, there's a question, Steve, from Joanne.
Go right ahead.
Steve, the first thing the people in Sandy River are going to ask me is, how much is it going to cost them? Before we form this interlocal agreement, will we know what the allotments are going to be for the plantations? Because that weighs heavy on people's decision making.
Go ahead, Joe.
Steve, I think that's an excellent question. And I feel that that's going to be a question in probably every community. And it's one of those questions that you'll have time to answer. If the voters in your community say, yes, let's enter into the discussions formally, one of the things you're going to want to talk about is how is it proportioned? What are the costs, even with generating the document? So there will be legal fees with generating the interlocal agreement. All of those things will be things that you'll talk through with each other in a more formal capacity. So I think that's one of the questions that needs to be answered. And then once you work through that process.
What is the answer, Joe? Will we have that information before we write up the interlocal agreement or not?
Before we sign it, we have to.
Before it's signed and goes back for a final vote, you would have that information. Absolutely.
We've already asked Consolidated for it.
We already have what?
I've asked Consolidated for the answer to that.
Has Consolidated given an indication of when that information is going to be available?
So what we have that came in today from Consolidated is a percentage of each community. So we don't have the actual numbers, but there's an estimated percentage.
Well, that is the answer.
That's the answer, right?
Has that been sent out to us?
It hasn't yet, no.
Why not? Can we share that information?
So I would be, I guess if you are ready to say that that's, the answer, but if you really can't negotiate with anybody until you've determined if you're gonna go forward with the interlocal corporation, if that makes sense.
I don't think that makes sense because I agree with Linda that we've gone past that point. I think that your Rangeley Plantation hasn't voted for the interlocal agreement, but I think everyone agrees that they want to go forward with it. And it's clear from the interest in the public that they want us to go forward with a solution for broadband. And we can't complete the interlocal agreement without us knowing what that percentage is, and maybe that isn't the percentage we go with, but it's a starting point.
And if we've received information, we're entitled to it.
And this number that you're going to hear from Joe, these numbers, starting point.
Steve, your last comment was broken a little bit. Could you repeat it?
Only, all these numbers mean, no negotiation, just starting point. Did you get the first part, Joe?
Yeah, I think you said it would be a starting point only, not for negotiations, correct?
So give, release the numbers and everybody knows this is just phase one,
Okay.
whatever the proper.
Okay.
So what are the numbers?
Can I add something?
Sure, Rebecca, go ahead.
I think this is being made a little bit more difficult than it needs to be. The towns need to vote, the assessors, the board of selectmen, to go with consolidated if that's the choice. That is the next step. And then MMA very clearly said that their recommendation is to have a vote of the townspeople. Yes, public says that you hear on the street that they support broadband, but to have a legal vote showing that, yes, they want to move forward, they want to get into conversations with all the towns and start creating an interlocal agreement. They were very clear, there were no doubts, that is the path forward. So that way you have it documented in each one of the towns that, yes, your people voted to move forward with the broadband and the interlocal agreement. And until that's done, yes, we can work on different things prior to that, but there's costs involved. And if one town votes no, that completely changes the whole dynamics of it. So as a finance director for the town of Rangeley, I know I'm not willing to use taxpayers' money for something that could possibly get voted down. It's not smart. We can still do certain things in the process, but to sit there and say, we're gonna create an interlocal agreement that's prepared by June 8th when we have our town vote, I don't think is realistic. It's not realistic. Can we get a vote done by end of August, end of July, beginning of August? Probably, possibly, I don't know, but I mean, I think I know everybody wants it done now, but there definitely is a process.
Rebecca, can I
Thank
have
you,
a
Rebecca.
clarification?
Yeah, Mike, that's again, what we said earlier relative to MMA's suggestions to us.
May
I
I
have
add,
to bring this, hang on one second, and then I'll be done. I have to come back to my,
We can't hear you.
Joe, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead, Steve.
Carry on, guys.
Okay, you first. Mike, Rebecca, on the consolidated approval, you're meaning the select boards from each plantation, not the general population? Not
That is
the-
correct. That is,
Okay. So if that can happen prior to June 8th, or whenever the town meetings are, like right away. And then on June 8th, or whatever the town meetings are, they ask the warrant thing, and then we have the interlocal special town meeting a month after or prior to the August bond date. And if everybody's in agreement, we can move forward.
Yes.
But thank you.
Is that right, Joe? I didn't miss anything, did I?
So, yes, but just to be very, very, very clear here, it's obvious that everybody's interested in CCI. The reason I'm a little being very careful is that there are the delegates here, there are members of the press in this meeting also, and you have other proposals on the table. So I will share that information if that's what you'd like to do. But the second thing is, I am proposing, just to be clear, 2 town meetings. So one that is your normal annual June 8th town meeting to ask for permission or authorization to discuss this interlocal agreement, and then a second town meeting, special town meeting for the purpose of final approval of that document. I just want to be very clear with everybody that that is what I am proposing.
One second clarification, Joe. This is Kate. On the second final meeting, would that be also a vote to move forward with the broadband with Consolidated itself? Or is that already approved?
That's a really good question. Yes. So you would be negotiating. So you wouldn't, when the individual boards vote, you'd be voting to negotiate. Once you have created your interlocal agreement, that is the body that enters into the contract with the provider. So that's why the steps are important. You need the interlocal agreement, which is an amalgamation of the communities that has binding legal authority to enter into this agreement. That's why the steps are important. They would sign the contract with Consolidated, they being the representatives of each board that make up the board of directors, if you will. However, the interlocal agreement is coordinated. That's why it's going to take some discussion.
May I ask one question? In retrospect, why did we wait until last week to ask the most vital question to this process and moving it along?
Is that a question for me?
Anybody? We've been meeting for 4 months now, and I think for the past month and a half, almost weekly.
Yeah, so I'll answer it this way. I thought to do it last week, so I guess I was the first one to think of it. That's why I did it last week.
I believe I brought this issue to the forefront in the first meeting we had in January. Repeatedly.
At this point, that doesn't, I mean, it doesn't matter.
It's too late.
Yeah, it's too late, but so let's continue to move forward as we are discussing. Have each of the plantations voted, boards already agreed to go with Consolidated? Did you?
No, Sandy River has not voted.
Just the assessors, I mean, right?
The assessors have not voted.
We discussed it at our last meeting. We received the 2 proposals Tuesday afternoon. We had our meeting on Tuesday evening.
But you didn't do a final vote. You say you would have to go vote for.
We discussed it. Both assessors were in agreement.
Okay,
Really straightforward.
okay, that's good.
And I was at the Rangeley Plantation meeting last night where it was agreed to go with Consolidated.
Okay, so if I can ask, when you say to go with Consolidated, what actions do the assessors take
Well,
when you say to go with Consolidated?
I would rather.
Hi there, this is Liz calling in from Rangeley Plantation. And last night during the assessors meeting for Rangeley Plantation, the assessors voted to enter into entertaining the idea to moving forward to discuss further, to keep going with it. They're in favor of going forward with the group. Of course, understanding that it needs to go to the voters for approval in the end. But they're on board with, trying to develop, further plans, getting those documents together and working on that. That's really all they're entitled to do. I'm not really sure why we have to have permission to hold discussion on anything. We get together and discuss things all the time. We used to have quarterly meetings, and we never had to have an agreement or never had to have permission from the taxpayers to, meet on those issues. So I'm not really sure why we're all of a sudden having to have this, but I guess it is what it is. So.
Thank you, Liz. Appreciate that. I have two questions still. I'm wondering what actions other plantations have taken. And when you say go with Consolidated, are you talking about negotiating with Consolidated based on the proposal that was provided? Is that what you mean by that?
We concluded the matrix was too expensive, not suitable to our needs, and Consolidated was suitable.
Okay.
Joe, Steve, if I could interject a couple of quick points. We could consider having an agreement with Consolidated contingent upon the proper, paperwork to have everybody committed to do the final signing, but enter at least into an agreement with them pending that, so that then we can start the negotiations simultaneously while the co-op agreement is being worked out. The other thing, I had a dialogue with Carol Miller, who heads up the whole New Hampshire broadband program, and she knows the consolidated efforts that have happened there, and she's the director of broadband initiatives for the National Collaborative for Digital Equity. And she indicated that once you can get going with Consolidated to have an agreement, they act very fast. They've done that in the communities there. And once the contract does get signed, Consolidated will move quickly. She gave them high marks. And she was willing to, participate in any of our meetings possibly too, if you needed that extra feedback.
Thank you, Daryl. Appreciate that. So the fact still remains that we need to develop an interlocal agreement. We need to talk about what the board of directors looks like, what the responsibilities are, all of those type of things. We still, the elephant in the room is how are we going to divide up the payment amongst the four communities to draw up that document. That's going to take a period of time. And I know, Linda, that you did bring it up a while back, but the process just took some time to work through. So any other thoughts? Let's go around the room. I'm going to speak for Steve here. Any thoughts at this point from you, Linda, from Dallas? I'll start with you.
Thoughts on what? I'm not following you.
Okay, Joanne, I'll go to you.
What's the question?
What is the question, Joe?
Do you have any thoughts on where we're at right now?
Well, from my perspective, when I speak to the other assessors about whether we choose to go with the consolidated offer and engage in the expense of developing an interlocal agreement and participate in an interlocal agreement, I'm just going to need some kind of numbers to talk about with them. And so that's where I'm at.
Okay. I'll forward that email out just for the sake of conversation. Because you did ask, I'll read you the percentages here. I got to log back into my computer. While I'm logging in, Carrie Keep, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, if you want to go by the MMAs, what they want us to know, evidently we can't even talk about an agreement. How can we move forward 2 inches if we can't negotiate any kind of an agreement? I would think you'd have to maybe vote on it, have something to show you, vote as some kind of agreement, let them vote on that. It's going to cost money to keep going on this, to negotiate this agreement. That's another thing. I wouldn't spend 10 cents without voter approval.
Okay, thank you. And I think that was everybody. Steve, any thoughts? No, Mike? Can't hear you. Okay. All right, so I've got the email open that has the percentages. I'm going to read them aloud for everybody. So Rangeley is 39.8. Rangeley Plantation is 20.9. Sandy River Plantation, 16.7. Dallas Plantation, 22.6.
And what is that based on, Joe? How did they come up with those percentages?
Good question. I'll read that to you. This is from Jeff Nevins. I did some analysis based on the individual cost estimates they did for the 4 towns. These are standalone costs for each town, and the total came out to 5.3 million for the individual bill for the 4 towns.
This is percentage, not cost.
Only one of us can speak at a time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because of the synergies that are created from a 4-town build, we were able to get the cost down to 3.7 million. We did not break out the 3.7 on a per community basis. So the best we have is the breakdown based on the individual cost per town. So these are starting point percentages. Did everybody get a chance to write those down? 39.8 for Rangeley, 20.9 for Rangeley Plantation, 16.7 for Sandy River Plantation, 22.6 for Dallas Plantation.
I just got thrown off when he said standalone costs, because we're not really asking for the standalone costs.
It doesn't matter. It would be the same percentage,
I guess so.
right? Because it's the total cost and then they.
So this is Daryl. Would that translate into the bonding piece when you look at the municipal bond type of thing, of how you would divvy up that financial arrangement? 39.8 could be Rangeley's share when you're doing the guarantee under the bonds.
I thought that these numbers only really came into effect if the consolidated goes bankrupt and we have to pay, there's a responsibility, a risk of paying back the bond ourselves. Otherwise, my understanding is we have Rangeley going for the bond anyway.
Right.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we had figured that out, where the town of Rangeley was going to take the bond themselves. If you have an interlocal agreement, the cooperative authority will be securing the bond, signing the contract.
Correct.
So
In the MMA documents, they recommended that the individual townships take the bonds, even though it was an interlocal organization.
okay, so it sounds like, you know, as a group, the 4 towns have some things that they need to work out. I mean, it really, that's the way I'm looking at it. We need to write all these things down so that we know what the agreement is. So the 4 towns know what the agreement is. The voters know. So the voters know what they're saying yes to or no to. So the outcome, so the next steps for this meeting were the 2 things that we've talked about. The first was to let your respective boards know. I've got to mute somebody here. Let your respective boards know that you prefer the consolidated proposal. That's number 1. And then the other item is to, as far as I can see, seek authorization from town meeting to enter into formal discussions and generate an interlocal agreement. It sounds like most of you have already approached your boards with part 1 of that, and CCI, that's taken care of. You're interested in negotiating with CCI. The Rangeley board does not meet again until April 5th. This will be on the agenda to kind of talk about then. The other item, which Rangeley will need to know for April 5th when we get there, in fact, I need to know this Thursday morning when we put packets together. Are we all putting this article on our warrants? The one I read to you earlier, some version of it. That's how I need to know that to go forward. So when I meet with my board on Monday, I can tell them what we're all up to.
Yes, for Dallas Plantation.
Thank you. Joanne?
Can I just,
Oh, go ahead, Liz. Go ahead.
sorry, can I just make a request?
Absolutely.
It seems like there's an awful lot of information that is available for these meetings, but we're not getting presented it before the meeting to study it and review it and give input during the meeting. It would be incredibly helpful to have that information, like the percentages, ahead of time, rather than, finding it out during the meeting.
I appreciate that, Liz. I'm going to repeat what you said for Steve. Liz had some concerns that some of the information was not available ahead of the meeting, namely the percentages. I got that email sometime earlier today, and I did not send it out to everybody. Not really to spite you, I just didn't get to it. So noted, and I will share that with all of you after the meeting.
It'd be also nice if we could have a copy of that, warrant article ahead of time, so that way if anybody has any input on it, again, we've had a chance to study it and review it.
Yep, absolutely. Again, the warrant article, Steve, she was commenting on the warrant article. That literally was written 10 minutes before this meeting. I printed it, brought it into the room. I did not email that with all of you either. Not to leave you out. I was trying to get the meeting set up in the other room and then in this office. So I will email that to you certainly after the meeting. And again, it's a draft. So Dallas Plantation said, yes, you do intend to present this to your Board of Assessors to put on the annual town meeting warrant. Liz, did you have any thought on that? In Rangeley Plantation, Liz or Carrie Keep, any thoughts?
Yeah, we've already wrote our warrant for a town meeting.
Okay.
We haven't posted it, but
Okay. Do you have any, is there a time to get it on there? Do you think the board would vote to think about it?
I don't know. We just had a meeting last night, so we'll be not 2 weeks before we have another one.
Okay.
We have to get a town report written.
But to clarify, Joe, I think what Carrie Keep is saying is that they voted on a warrant article very similar to this last night that they were going to put on the ballot.
No, we didn't. Our town warrant's already been written and signed,
Oh,
but 2 weeks ago.
I'm sorry, and I did misunderstand you, sorry.
Okay. Joanne?
I'll be meeting with the other assessors tomorrow and I will bring it to their attention.
Okay. Okay.
Huh?
Do you have anything else to add, Carrie?
No, I would expect we'd have to have a special town meeting. Nothing says we can't discuss it at our town meeting. It's gonna be around the second week in May.
Okay. So it sounds like everybody else is going to try to get it on their town meeting warrant. Okay. Any other business? Oh. Set our next meeting, okay. When do you guys?
Are we gonna schedule a meeting with Consolidated to start discussions with them? As Daryl said, in conjunction, contingent on.
You can almost do an intent agreement that just says, yes, the consensus is to go consolidated pending the completion of our other paperwork. And at least you got the initiative as a placeholder with consolidated, and then hopefully no surprises and you can get rolling this summer.
Yeah, I'm going to voice my concern that if I'm consolidated and I'm in a meeting with 4 groups that haven't laid out their ground rules yet, not really ready to negotiate.
True.
Well, wouldn't it be helpful to see a draft contract and from them and answer some of the questions that we might have about exactly how it's gonna happen?
It's up to you. I would say a reminder for everybody that if there are contracts, presented at this point in time, they're not public. They can't be shared with the public at this point. Until you're done negotiating and something is signed, that's something that really needs to be handled with kid gloves. I would want to be very careful with that. That's really something that should be done, once you've got your interlocal agreement in place.
We haven't even met with them since they gave us the formal proposal to ask any questions about it. I guess I don't know, it seems like there are questions still outstanding, but maybe I'm wrong.
Joe, this is Kate. I think kind of what I was thinking about this is with Consolidated is that we do have questions. We do have some follow-up questions based on their proposal. But also if, we tentatively selected them as the potential, right? And we're making decisions based on a timeline of August. So we need to know that Consolidated is at least willing to participate with us, even though it's not a formal negotiated agreement, to get dates, to get public meetings, to have, we're not gonna pass this by anybody on a voter unless they've heard a presentation, from the community would have a presentation from Consolidated on this, which will have to happen in June and July. I mean, we have a tight window. So as long as we can get Consolidated at least, mentally prepared that there's multiple things going at the same time, but if they're not willing to do this for us, then we're never making August for a bond. And, that's a totally different conversation then.
Yeah, I agree with you. And one of the benefits to each community talking with their elected folks about favoring this proposal lets them know that you favor the proposal and that you want to eventually negotiate with them formally. So, taking that action at each board table and then letting them know that you've taken that action is good faith as far as I'm concerned. Getting into the details of contracts before it's ripe, if you will, getting those into the public is not a good idea.
We're not talking about the contract to the public, we're talking about the proposal, what the, proposal is.
Absolutely. And I think once the folks have decided to join the interlocal agreement, or discuss it, then I think it's an opportune time to make those things make the discussions public, the presentations. If you want to schedule it, throw some dates out.
Well, I think we need to talk to Consolidated, as Kate just said, we need to make sure they're on board with our timeline.
So I guess if we could get permission from the people on the meeting, that we could give Consolidated a call and see that will work for them. I think that would be a start, and who that person would be to call them. I mean, we've been funneling everything through you, Joe. So my recommendation would be you, but that's just my thought.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that for you.
Is that agreeable?
We have a question from a member of the public. Go ahead, Mark.
Is it possible that the delegates could forward questions to you and you could email them to Consolidated to get some generic questions about their proposal answered? That would be helpful to the community members that these delegates represent without actually getting into the nuts and bolts of negotiating the contract.
I think that's a good idea. What does the group think about that?
Either that or have a meeting with him and ask the questions, either one.
I've communicated with Jeff Nevins on a couple of occasions. He's been very responsive. He stated that early on, I believe in the December meetings, he'd be happy to take any and all questions. So I think they are more than willing to respond to any of the delegates.
Okay. So what would you like to do next? What I intend to do in Rangeley, I'll clear this up again. I know I've said it several times, is to present this warrant article to the Rangeley Select Board so that they can present it to the voters to authorize them to enter discussions with you folks, with the other plantations, to talk about an interlocal agreement. That's what I intend to do here. I think it would be the best course of action for all communities to do it. But that's up to you folks.
You're gonna send us copies of that warrant article?
Absolutely. Yep, I will. As soon as we're out of this meeting, Carrie, I'll send that.
All right, well, I'm gonna check with that, that warrant hasn't been posted, so maybe we can put it on there for the annual meeting. I won't
Okay.
promise you, but.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. Okay, any thoughts on the next meeting?
Why don't we schedule one when we have some substance to work with?
Okay. Any other comments? I'm gonna do a last call in Steve Philbrook fashion. Any comments from the conference room?
Not at this point.
Joanne from Sandy River, any questions, comments before we wrap up?
No, I'm good.
Thank you. Steve Philbrook, questions, comments? That's a thumbs up from the chairman. Thank you, Steve. Mark Beauregard, any comments or questions? Hearing none. How about Rangeley Plantation?
No, I
Okay,
don't think so.
okay, thank you, Carrie Keep. Appreciate it. I'm going to email those things out when the meeting ends. Thank you for your patience with me on that. And we will have another meeting, Steve, in case you didn't catch it, when there's some more substance. So we'll schedule a meeting at a time and date to be determined when we have some more information to go over. Anything else? Last call? Okay, meeting is closed at 2:55. Thank you all.
Yeah.